Morning World History. Today we are going to talk about conquest in the Americas. So last week we spent a lot of time focusing on European conquest and interactions in Africa, particularly with Portugal, and then also talking about India, Indonesia, Japan, China, Korea, all over there. But this week we're going to flip things around a little bit. We're going to talk about European encounters in the Americas. And so this is probably going to come with a lot of terms and people that you've heard before, so hopefully some of this is familiar to you and it makes it a little bit easier to grasp. So we're going to talk about first. We all know who got there first, right? Christopher Columbus. Although technically speaking, he didn't get there first. There were some Vikings back in the 1100s. It's a long story. Anyway, they didn't stay. They got bored of Canada and went back to Greenland. And so now we have the Spanish, who like to take the claims for the first people there, despite the fact that Christopher Columbus was actually Italian. You get it. It's a lot more complicated than people make it seem. And so Columbus shows up and meets the Native Americans and is thoroughly confused because he believes that the world is a lot smaller than it is and believes he's reached India, which is why he names them Indians. But the first people that he meets are called the Tainos. So the first encounter is the Taino people. And the Tainos lived in villages. They grew corn, yams, cotton, which they wove into cloth, and they were very friendly towards the Spanish. Columbus noted that they were generous to such a degree that no one would believe it unless they actually saw it. But despite the friendly reception, relations soon soured. So the Spanish are fervent Catholics, right? They're the ones who started the Inquisition. They're the ones who were all like, you must be Catholic or you will die type situation. And so they don't respond very well when the Native Americans don't pay proper respect to the Christian symbols. And this offends the Spanish very greatly because they were very sensitive about this, and the way they were raised made them not open to alternate religions in any way, shape, or form. Now the Native Americans weren't necessarily disrespectful to the Spanish or to the Catholic symbols. However, they weren't properly respectful according to how the Spanish wanted them to behave. And so Columbus basically believed that he was so superior to the Tainos that because they didn't pay the proper respect, that he could decide what happened to them. And this is a superiority complex with incredible unchecked arrogance. And so basically he claims the Taino land for Spain, says it's not your land anymore, now it's mine. And then he actually took several Tainos as prisoner back to the Spanish king. And Columbus's encounter became so famous in Europe because he comes back with gold, he comes back with new crops, he comes back with slaves, he comes back with things that make him very rich. And so other Spaniards want this too. And so this starts this wave of conquistadors. And conquistadors are Spanish conquerors, usually soldier, mercenary, missionary, a blend of a lot of things. And they soon arrive in the Americas. They first settle on the islands of Hispaniola. Hispaniola is now the Dominican Republic and Haiti, so this is where they went first. They also went to Cuba, they went to Puerto Rico. Throughout the region, the conquistadors are seizing the Native Americans' gold. They're seizing their ornaments. They're making them pan for more gold. So they're sort of taking them as slaves to find the gold for them. And at the same time, they're doing their best to force the Native Americans to convert to Christianity. And so the Spanish conquistadors only numbered in the hundreds, despite the fact that there were millions of Native Americans. However, the Spanish had lots of advantages. Okay, so their advantages mostly had to do with the fact with their technology. So they had guns and they had cannons, and the Native Americans did not. And it's very difficult to fight someone with a cannon when you only have a bow and arrow, or a spear or something like that. The Europeans also had metal armor. Metal armor can stop a spear, but the Native American armor could not stop a cannon. The Europeans also had horses. And the thing is, can you imagine if you had never seen a horse before, and then all of a sudden somebody who has a gun comes riding towards you on this big creature that appears to obey its commands? It would be terrifying. And that's what happened. The Native Americans were terrified of the horses because they'd never seen them before. And then most important, they also had disease. Particularly relevant in today's society, right? So, Europeans unknowingly, they had no idea, but they were carrying diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza. Before the Europeans got here, there was no flu in the Americas. And the Native Americans had no immunity. They had no resistance to these diseases. And so astonishing percentages that caught these diseases died. People talk about the coronavirus death rates. These death rates were way, way, way higher than that. The disease spread so rapidly that it was pretty much wiping out village after village after village. And as a result, the Native American population declined by 90% in 100 years. That means 9 out of every 10 people died. Millions of Native Americans died mostly from disease, as the Europeans just made their way inland. And this makes it really easy for this next guy named Hernan Cortez to conquer. So you have Cortez, who shows up and goes to Mexico. Cortez was a landowner in Cuba. So he originally went to Cuba, but he heard of these expeditions that had been repelled by Native Americans and said, you know what, I can succeed where they failed. I'll bet you I can. And so in 1519, he lands on the coast of Mexico with 600 men, 16 horses, a couple cannons, and begins this almost like a hike towards Tenochtitlan, which is the capital of the Aztec Empire. And a young woman named Malinche, who was called Doña Marina by the Spanish, served as his translator and his advisor. She knew both the Maya language and the Aztec language and learned Spanish very quickly. So this is how Cortez was communicating. He worked with a Native American translator. Malinche told Cortez that the Aztecs had gained power by conquering groups of other people. So the Aztec Empire, as we kind of learned, they were really big, but they got that way by one tribe conquering other tribes and bringing them all united under a rule. The Aztecs would sacrifice their captives to the Aztec gods every year. Yes, the Aztecs were one of those that did human sacrifice. And many conquered people hated the Aztecs because they were very bitter that the Aztecs conquered them. And so Cortez created alliances with all the conquered groups that hated the Aztecs. So Cortez didn't need just his Spanish men. He actually formed these alliances with other Native Americans. So he uses a translator, Malinche, and also forms alliances with conquered groups. It's a really solid strategy, and it really works. So messengers bring word about the Spanish to the Aztec ruler, who is Moctezuma, Montezuma. You hear it lots of different ways. And he was worried because Moctezuma thought at first that the Spanish people might be one of the Aztec god kings who had long ago vowed to return. So as part of their religion, they believed that there was a god king called Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl was a god king who had said, I will return one day and I will reclaim my empire. And so Moctezuma wasn't sure if Cortez was Quetzalcoatl. And so he didn't want to just send out warriors to fight him, because you don't really just go fight your long-awaited god. And so he sends him presents, turquoise, feathers, other goods with religious importance. So he sends them these very valuable, very important presents, but says, please stay away. You can have all the presents that you want, but please don't come here. However, Cortez receives all of this, says, okay, this is nice. But he also starts getting some gold and silver and says, ooh, this is really nice. I want more. And so he becomes more determined than ever. He's fighting, he's negotiating, he's forcing his way inland, and he arrives at the Aztec capital and is just dazzled by what he sees. Moctezuma welcomes Cortez because, again, Moctezuma's scared of him. And relations between the Aztecs and the Spaniards start okay, but very quickly grow strained. Mostly because of religion. Cortez scorns the Aztecs' religion and says, no, you need to be Christian. At the same time, the more they decided to stay in the city, the more treasure they saw and the more greedy they got. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to kidnap the king and imprison him, because if they had him in prison, then they could take all of his riches. And so Cortez compelled, which very much means to force, Cortez forced Moctezuma to sign over his land and treasure to the Spanish. In the meantime, a new force of Spanish conquistadors have arrived on the coast because they want some of what Cortez has now. And so in the confusion that follows, you've got Spanish fighting Spanish, Spanish fighting Aztecs, Aztecs fighting other natives, the natives fighting the Spanish, so on and so forth. And in all of that confusion, the Aztecs are actually able to drive the Spanish out of the city. And so it looks like the Aztecs have won. The Aztecs have kicked all the Spanish out. However, half the Spanish were killed in the fighting, but Moctezuma was killed in the fighting too. So now the Aztecs have to replace their king. Cortez retreated and replans an assault. And in 1521, after a really, really brutal struggle, he and his native allies end up capturing and destroying the Aztec capital. The Spanish later take all the ruins of the Aztec capital that they destroyed and build Mexico City on top of it, which is where Mexico City still stands today. As in the Caribbean, the disease really helped smallpox spread among the Aztecs, and so by the time the conquistadors came back in 1521, smallpox had already killed a lot of the Aztecs, so they had considerably fewer left to fight the Spanish. Okay, so strained relations because of religion. And then in 1519, the Aztecs kicked the Spanish out. And then in 1521, the Spanish succeed in capturing the Aztec capital. That's the story of how the Spanish conquered the Aztecs. But that isn't the only conquering going on. You also have another very, very strong Native American group, the Inca, which we learned about when we did our Native American unit. And Cortez's success is inspiring other adventurers because they see how rich and how famous and how wealthy Cortez gets from this. And so they say, well, I want that too. Particularly this guy Pizarro, Francisco Pizarro. Sorry, that needs to be an I. So Francisco Pizarro decides not to go where Cortez went, which was the Aztecs, but instead he's interested in Peru's Inca Empire, which, according to legend, had even more riches than the Aztecs. And so Pizarro arrived in Peru in 1532 after the Incan ruler, Atahualpa, had won the throne from his brother in a civil war. Now, what does civil war do to nations? It tears them apart. It destroys them. It weakens them. And so the thing is, immediately after a civil war, a country is in no shape to repel other external invaders, particularly not external invaders with technological advances. And so the king refused to become a Spanish vassal. The king refused to convert to Christianity. Pizarro showed up, said, hey, you know what, you can still do all your stuff, but you just give some of your money and some of your wealth to us. And the king says, no. And then Pizarro says, well, how about you just convert to Christianity? And the king says, no. And so Pizarro does something similar to Cortez, where he goes to all of the enemies of the Inca Empire and allies with them. And so Pizarro and his Native American allies actually capture the king and start slaughtering thousands of the Inca. The Spanish king demands a huge ransom for the ruler. They basically say, okay, you want your king back? Pay us lots and lots of money. And the Inca were desperate, and so they did. They did pay the Spanish lots of money to get the ruler back, but the Spanish killed the king anyways. And so despite continuing resistance, Pizarro and his followers basically overrun the Inca heartland. They have the same advantages that Cortez did, the superior weapons, the Inca being weakened from the European diseases that are spreading among them. And from Peru, Spanish forces surge across Ecuador and Chile, and before long, Spain has conquered most of South America in its growing empire. Pizarro was killed by a rival Spanish faction after he entered the city of Lima in Peru, but ultimately the damage was done, and so he ends up conquering the Inca, who are mostly, again, located in Peru. Now, let's talk about some effects. Why do we care? What are the effects of all this? Well, for the Spanish, this is a really great thing. They're adding money, they're adding land, they're adding wealth, they're adding slaves, they're adding resources, farms, plantations, servants, land. Things are going great for the Spanish Empire. Unfortunately, things aren't going great for any of the Native Americans. Millions of Native Americans are killed and conquered. The Spanish are seizing all their valuable goods. They're taking their gold. They're taking their silver. And although they use Native American labor to establish silver mines in Peru and Mexico, they're now not only taking the stuff they already have, but they're taking over their way of obtaining their resources. And so they're taking over the mines and then they're forcing the Native Americans to work in the mines to pull up the silver and then giving it to the Spanish. So they're taking over every aspect of this Native American society. With this wealth, Spain is now Europe's strongest power and one of the strongest powers in the world in the 1500s. So you've got Spain equaled power. They had more power than Portugal, more power than England, more power than the Holy Roman Empire, which is who? I hope you remember this. Germany. More power than Italy, because the Pope is going through a lot right now. He's dealing with the Reformation and the split because England's Protestant now and it's a mess. And so Spain is using this lack of focus all throughout Europe to take power. The effect on the Native Americans, though, was way different. A lot of Native Americans believed that this was the end of the world. It certainly sounds like the apocalypse. Tens of thousands of them have died. Some through cannon, some through war, some through disease. And many Native Americans converted to Christianity just to try and stop the suffering and the pain. But a lot of natives continued to resist the Spanish in any way possible. The Maya fought the Spanish rule in Mexico and Central America for a long time. Revolts were rampant among the Inca as well. And throughout the Americas, Native Americans resisted European influences by preserving aspects of their culture wherever they could, particularly their language, their religious traditions, and their clothing. In time, Native American culture blended with Spanish culture to produce a lot of the unique cultures that we have in Latin America. The early encounters between the Spanish conquistadors and the Native Americans had these long-lasting impacts that are quite literally still affecting the world today. It's one of the reasons why Spanish is the predominant language spoken in Central and South America. So most of you that speak Spanish, you did because of these guys. Spain dramatically is changing the pattern of global encounters and is basically starting this European exploration and this race to piece up the Americas. And so despite the fact that we've only really talked about two different guys, these events have impacted our world even today. So, hope you enjoyed. Tomorrow we're going to talk about Spanish and Portuguese colonies in the Americas. You have your Junopod as per usual, and I wish you guys good luck. Again, contact me if you have any questions. Bye.